Thank you all in the audience for joining us today for this week's virtual panel that continues our All AVs Are Local series. We started this series as a way to give different glimpses at how different regions are adopting or preparing for AVs as a way to provide a real-world example of some of the bigger issues we talk about frequently. For today's panel, we're turning to Texas as an example landscape of the work that's happening in autonomous trucking. As a reminder, after the panel ends, you will be able to find the full recording of this and all our previous virtual panels on our website at pavecampaign.org, or follow us on social media at PAVE Campaign to keep up with our work in the AV space. My name is Tabitha Coulter, and I'm PAVE's Director of Operations and the moderator for today's panel. We have 4 special guests with us today who I'll quickly introduce, and then we'll dive into the questions. First up, we have Darran Anderson, Director of Strategy and Innovation with the Texas Department of Transportation. Darran is also a member of our PAVE Public Sector Advisory Council, and we're so excited he could join us today.
Thanks, happy to be here.
Our second panelist is Richard Bishop, Principal at Bishop Consulting, here to provide some broader perspective on the autonomous trucking boom. Richard, welcome.
Thank you, Tabitha.
And our third panelist is Robert Brown, Senior Director of External Affairs at TuSimple. Robert, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, excited.
And last but not least, we have Dan Goff, Head of Policy with Kodiak Robotics. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tabitha.
So thank you again, gentlemen, for joining us here at PAVE for this conversation on autonomous trucking. So to start us off, I'd like to turn to our 2 industry trucking members, Dan and Robert, and ask them to describe the Texas-based automated trucking projects they're engaged in. Where are they taking place? How big are they? What are you moving? All of those things. Dan, could you get us started?
Sure. So first, thanks again, Tabitha, for inviting me to participate today. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm the Head of Policy at Kodiak Robotics. We are a level 4 autonomous trucking startup. We're based in Mountain View, California, but we were actually the first autonomous trucking company, at least I'm aware of, to set up operations in Texas. We opened our testing and operations hub in Lancaster, Texas, which is just south of Dallas, in July of 2019. And since then, I've actually been making commercial deliveries, hauling dry van trailers on behalf of paying customers between Dallas and Houston. We have a fleet of 10 trucks. Like everybody in this industry, we're currently testing with a safety driver and what we call a system operator, right seat operator in the truck. So as I'm sure many people know, the old joke in the industry is you can tell a vehicle drives itself if it always has 2 people in it at all times. But while we have those safety drivers, we actually are started making our first disengage-free deliveries, where we're actually able to carry freight without the safety driver grabbing the wheel at all, or anything of the like on highway, where we're focused on our long haul applications. We've got a fleet of 10 trucks, and we've been really engaged with the Texas community really since the beginning, including we've worked with Darran and his team at TxDOT for over 2 years at this point, and we're really proud to chair the freight subcommittee of an autonomous vehicle task force for the last year. So again, thanks so much for inviting me. Really excited to be here today and to talk about Texas.
That's great. And Robert, what about TuSimple?
Thank you, Tabitha, and great job, Dan. Robert Brown here, Senior Director of External Affairs at TuSimple. Our first entree into Texas was a pilot we did with the U.S. Postal Service back in 2019. And it goes back to when I first met Darran. Made sure, flew out there, made sure I gave him a heavy briefing and warning that we were coming to Texas. As a former state employee, I remember those days. The worst thing you could do to somebody is put them on blast in front of their boss and surprise one. So I know Dan and others share our perspective. Is we want to work hand in glove with our state partners, and we can't ask for any better state partners than in Texas. As for TuSimple, we have 2 locations now in Texas. Our kind of like our main hub, our exciting one that we've actually built from the ground up, almost completed, is in Alliance, Texas, part of their mobility and innovation zone. Great partners at Hillwood, and it's a great sandbox, not just for TuSimple, but for the whole industry that Darran's been a part of, and TxDOT and DPS. And then our other one is right next to DFW Airport. And we haul loads for folks like UPS every day. We kind of go the other direction from Dan. We kind of that El Paso to Dallas run we're doing, but we are building out what they call the Texas Triangle. It is really freight mecca when it comes to Texas. It's incredible the amount of volume that comes in and around in Texas and of course across state lines. And they've been a great partner. TuSimple, we had 50, like Dan mentioned, 50 trucks, an R&D fleet. We pretty much bookend between Phoenix Phoenix, Arizona, and Dallas is our location, I'm sorry, is in Tucson, but we kind of autonomously travel between Phoenix and Dallas right now. So that's kind of our ODD and our map right now, but we're expanding in Texas and have ambitions to expand out through the Southeast later this year.
That's great. And Darran, from your perspective at Texas DOT, was there a conscious effort by Texas to foster automated trucking? And if so, where did that effort originate and what were its goals?
I don't think there was a conscious effort to specifically foster automated trucking in particular, but in 2017, both our governor and our legislature became significantly interested in the potential of automation and vehicle movement in the state, and passed legislation that opened that broadly for innovation in the state. And as a result of that, organically, freight kind of bubbled to the top, and a lot of that has to do with the demand of freight in our state. Robert kind of mentioned that, and I'm sure we'll get a little more into that in a moment. But from that point forward, though, we have significantly focused on freight as one of the initial emerging AV marketplaces for developers in the state, and certainly have, I believe, last count, at least 10 different companies operating in the state in testing and also in some cases supporting customers.
That's great. And Richard, you've worked as a consultant for a number of clients in this space and have seen different deployments and partnerships. Could you talk at a bigger scale about the appeal of testing or development of trucking in Texas? What makes it such an attractive location?
Yeah, certainly, Tabitha. I do support lots of players in the startup space and the autonomy space in general, whether it's traditional manufacturers or whatever. So that's the perspective I'm coming from. And I'll answer your question by starting very broad. If you look across the world, by far the best place to to be testing and developing automated trucking is the U.S. That's not necessarily because the others don't have it right. They just have different regulatory structures, and ours is more open to that. China is similar, and Australia as well. But the U.S. is the best in terms of the nature of the trucking industry. We have our biggest fleets are like 25,000 trucks each. That's typical of UPS and FedEx, and those kinds of players have the ability to have professional staff who can interact and think about what advanced technology can do. So you have a very organized and professional trucking industry, and you have an ideal regulatory environment currently in the U.S. So then when you think about Texas, it's kind of a microcosm of the U.S. All those good things are happening in Texas. The freight routes are there. The big fleets certainly are operating there, and Texas has created a welcoming environment. So that combination of the state itself and just the nature of the freight flows make it all work.
That's great. And Dan, anything else specific to add there about how Kodiak identified the opportunity in Texas?
Sure. When we first launched, and actually yesterday was our third birthday as a company, we did a pretty detailed analysis of where we wanted to be and what we thought the right locations were for our business, and Texas really popped out as the clear answer from that analysis. And that's due to the factors I think everyone has discussed. The size of the freight economy, the amount of freight to ship, the great transportation workforce in Texas, the regulatory structure, and all of these factors. Also, I think from sort of a technical perspective, we chose the Dallas to Houston run partially because you get a good mix of different environments. You see some cities, you see some suburbs, you see some pretty quiet rural areas, and it's helpful to be able to test in all of those kinds of environments. I would, until maybe a month or two ago, I would have said no for very limited snow. Now we know that snow and deep freeze is maybe more of an issue than we had planned on. But this is our life these days. Continuing 2020. And I think there's one more thing that we didn't really count on that I think makes a huge difference was just how supportive the environment is. Everyone we've worked with really wants to see us in Texas and wants to see us succeed. And that sounds like nothing, but it's actually a huge deal. And that goes for folks like Darran and his team at TxDOT, the team in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at North Central Council for Texas Government. It's done tremendous work helping to bring companies to space. And we've had a great relationship with the government in Lancaster, where we're based as well. And it is, you know, as Robert knows, that is actually not consistent across the country. And it's pretty amazing, you know, how helpful people are and how happy they are to see us in the state and see us succeed.
Great. And Dan touched on this a little bit, but Robert, how would you describe the different kinds of domains or environments that your trucks have operated in within Texas? Have they shaped the design or development of your driving systems in any way?
Yeah, it's been a great place to test our vehicles. We are working, as I mentioned, between kind of specifically in Texas, El Paso and Dallas, but operating large industrial parks. Think, you know, UPS fulfillment center near the highway to UPS fulfillment center in the highways is kind of our ODD. And where, you know, TuSimple sees value, and I think the lion's share of the level 4 developers is that middle mile. There's always going to be a need for a human to deliver, you know, that last mile to the store, to be the customer service part of a fleet like US Express and McLean. They always talk about that there'll always be a need for their drivers. But doing that middle mile where you can stretch that, what they call window time, and, you know, put that on an autonomous truck is ideal, not just for the, you know, the carriers, but even for the end consumers. You know, getting goods faster, more efficient, less carbon, potential less chance for waste. I always steal this talking point, sorry, Richard, is ripe tomatoes that Richard has coined. You know, getting ripe tomatoes out of the Southwest up to other parts of the country. You know, it's a transportation problem, and not that autonomous trucks will solve everything, but, you know, when you talk to the fleets like US Express, capacity, finding qualified, safe drivers is very difficult right now. And hopefully automated trucks will help alleviate that in the next few years. And in Texas, like I said, I can't sing their praises enough. To echo Dan's thing, I always say when you call someone at Texas, it's like, how can I help you? And that is for sure not the answer you always get in some of the other states, and even my home state of California, which I unfortunately hate to say that, but it's a growing problem, and Texas is winning the race. I mean, people are voting with their feet. All the companies that I'm aware of have a presence in Texas and growing operations, so it's a real boon to them, and then there's some surrounding states like Arizona and New Mexico as well.
Yeah, I'll add to that briefly. You know, Robert, you brought up the ripe tomatoes. Thank you. But it's about, you know, moving things that can go bad. You know, so food movement and its ripeness for tomatoes, but it's also any kind of refrigerated goods. There's a whole world of discovery that's yet to happen when automated trucks become mainstream. What's the effect on supply chain? When you think in particular about refrigerated trucks, those trucks, if it's going cross country, it'll take about 6 days for a human driver because the driver has to sleep. The truck is sitting still with the refrigeration unit running all that time. So imagine a 3-day trip because it's automated. You've got that much less energy being used just to keep that food cold. And it's just one example of so many other areas.
Absolutely. That actually, I was about to ask you, Richard, about technical challenges for automated trucks, and I think you gave us a bit of that. So I want to go to Darran now. I feel like everybody's been talking around about the unique needs of Texas and the landscape there and stuff. So Darran, I wanted to turn to you and ask about what you would say are some of Texas's unique logistical needs and how automated trucks might serve them. Are there particular benefits that Texas is hoping to enjoy as a result of the efforts?
I think it's pretty well understood that Texas believes in economic development and enablement. And we do have some unique challenges. I mean, if you look at our border with Mexico, we have 28 border crossings. 14 of those are for include commercial motor vehicle movement. And we're first in trade among US states with Mexico. And then as you look at the Gulf ports, we have 11 deep draft ports. We have another 8 that are shallow draft, and about 25% of all waterborne cargo in the US moves through those ports. When you look at all that, certainly it travels into Texas and through Texas to the rest of the country, through rail and air as well, but certainly freight. And the freight we project is going to double by 2045, the tonnage on our system. So we have a significant amount of freight that we currently have moving through the state, and certainly much more coming. And we have to look at that as it impacts congestion. We have to look at it as how it gets to our intermodal facilities, such as in Dallas-Fort Worth or out in the Permian Basin, and how do we enable that? And we really see that coupled with the freight industry talking about driver shortages and challenges there. And certainly our number one concern always being safety, that if we can find innovative ways in the use of autonomy to alleviate some of that, then it's a powerful thing for not just mobility and for the considerations of textile, but economics in the state as a whole. And so we do look to them, and we talk about things like nighttime movement. We talk about how they can address driver hours by using AV, and just a number of other instances such as data sharing that might help not only them in their movement, but also help us improve our system as we work on that. So it's really opening up new venues for us to examine on how we can improve the overall system and the movement of freight in that system.
That's great. Now I'd like to turn a little bit to one of the elements we hear a lot about with any partnerships or deployments, which is relationships. Richard, could you start us off by talking generally about the kinds of public-private collaborations that are needed to support these kind of automated truck operations?
Yeah, certainly. There's a variety of relationships. There's certainly on the commercial side, the ROI has to be there. The promise of automated trucking looks great on paper. The shippers have to see that. I think we're on the cusp of that now with all this freight moving around. And on the public side, there has to be, I guess I would say, less friction in terms of what it takes to operate in that area. It doesn't mean zero regulation necessarily. It means, a good solid back and forth that's going on. The public officials are very well informed. The ADS developers, the truck guys are forthcoming, and there's some relevant data out there. There's a certain level of data which is proprietary, but there's other data that can be shared. So it's like a very deep mutual respect, knowing that each side of that table has a responsibility to fulfill. And I've certainly seen that in Texas, and it's happening in other places.
That's great. And Darran, how has the Texas Department of Transportation worked to facilitate those collaborations?
Well, we started about 2013 with what we would call the Emerging Technology Task Force, and that opened our eyes early on to the advent of autonomous vehicles and what it may mean, and made us begin to think strategically about how we prepare for that. That continued with an innovation alliance with a number of our major regions in the state to not only talk about it, but then actually focus on deployments. Where might first use cases be, and what would be the user stories, the business cases that those regions could share with developers, so the developers understood what was available to them and how they might use their solutions to fit those needs. And then we continue that, as Robert mentioned, or I think it was Daniel, we have like many other states, we have a connected and autonomous vehicle task force, and we integrated freight heavily into that because, again, they're one of the most significant developers of AV in the state right now. And so that helps us shape our strategies. It helps us think about where we might focus, some of our, as I mentioned, data efforts, some of our infrastructure efforts, and just really it's a collegial effort across all three of those organizations to help, advance the technology, but focus on safety, reliability, and public assurance of that it's for the public good, and that we're working to make sure that it happens.
That's great. And Dan, anything else to add about how Kodiak has facilitated those private-public collaborations?
Yeah, so I think that's something we're really focused on and engaged in, and I think something that's really important when you're working specifically on autonomous trucking. That trucks are probably a little bit less tangible to people than I'm going to get into this robotaxi and it's going to get me where I need to go, and I can, play on my phone while I'm going. So we've thought it's really important to sort of show tangible benefits. There are a lot of intangible or less visible benefits from, added safety and reduced congestion to economic benefits to automated trucking. But, we've sort of been looking for opportunities to partner with TxDOT to show really tangible benefits. We did an initial pilot program where we were providing, where we were sort of looking for road condition data, things like where issues with road conditions like lane marking breakdowns or potholes, and providing that data to TxDOT and to UT Austin Center for Transportation Research, so that TxDOT could do some proactive road maintenance and sort of get ahead of problems before they get worse. I think it was a pretty exciting opportunity, and it's something that TxDOT's in the process of figuring out how to expand and how to collect that data, from volunteers in the autonomous vehicle industry. And I think that's a really good example of, we want to be able to say we are providing, explicit benefits that the roads are a little bit better in Texas because we're there and we're working with TxDOT. I think we're seeing opportunities to do similar things going forward, and we're really excited about that.
That's actually a perfect segue to another question we received about private-public collaboration from the audience that asked, what private-public data sharing practices are you involved in for your AV deployment? So Darran, let's start with you on that one, and then we'll turn it over to Robert to discuss the industry perspective.
Well, Dan kind of hit on it. We have a Connected Freight Corridors grant from the Federal Highways. And as a part of that, then we started talking, it's not just about connectedness, it's also how can we work with the AV community to think forward on that and what they might lend to that equation. And so we're working with both these companies to identify, what information is valuable to them, as well as what will help us both operate as well as maintain the system. And Dan mentioned things, just aberrations. And we work in the connected work zone space with Federal Highways as well. So identification of challenges with work zones, what does AV find difficult as they move through those or as they move down a particular corridor? And really the benefit is it doesn't just support them. This is about supporting human operators and passenger vehicles as well as freight now. So it's kind of getting ahead of the game. It's taking advantage of what their capabilities are and giving us additional eyes and additional sensors on the road to kind of look at what can we do to further the overall objectives of the department and not just focus on AV by itself.
Absolutely. And Robert?
Yeah, and to echo Darran, I think both, as Darran mentioned, both Kodiak and TuSimple have signed up for phase 2 of that project, and we're excited, to be a part of that. And it goes, across the industry. I mean, even at the federal level, I think over 50 companies now have signed up for AV Test Initiative, and also just kind of the nature, and Richard touched upon this a little bit as well. The nature of being a level 4 truck developer. The trucking industry is already a very highly regulated industry. There's a lot more transparency that just comes with being a carrier, through the FMCSA Safer program, getting inspected, roadside inspections and such. And I know Dan will touch upon inspections later on, but just when it comes to the opportunity from transparency and data perspective, maybe we're taking advantage of an already regulated thing, but I feel like at least the threshold from our perspective is a very high level of transparency. Whether, Dan and Kodiak, they've done a great job posting stuff through their Medium and, public education. TuSimple has done a good opportunity. We've had, some early days letting a lot of media on their truck, trying to explain what the technology is, what it's not, workforce impact, all that kind of stuff, I think kind of catches into data sharing. Like there's no company that's just going to disrupt this industry. We all have to do it together. It's an ecosystem approach. It's working, even though Dan and I are fierce competitors from a business perspective, we work very closely together on, the kind of the public affairs side, right? The regulatory, educating people on the benefits, and also educating people what the technology isn't. All that kind of stuff is very important for our industry, because we understand one or two bad actors could set the whole industry back, and we want, the rising tide to raise all boats. So. Sorry, a long-winded response to that, but it's a great question.
Yeah, and I'll throw a couple more onto that, again, related to not just autonomous trucking, but Way in Motion. Some of our partners have come forward and said, what does Way in Motion look like for an autonomous freight company? How might we facilitate that in the future and enable that, in a different way than what human operated trucks are doing. And so we've begun that conversation, and we're actually looking at some things that happen at some of our border crossings, and maybe that might extend further across the state and be applied to autonomous trucks. And also we have a freight network technology plan. And as a part of that, truck parking is one of the very first ones. And you'll think, well, AV trucks don't need to park, but they, in some cases, need to do transfer between fully autonomous to human operated operations. And that might tie into some of those truck parking facilities or near to intermodal facilities. So again, what they're doing enhances the entirety of the system and helps us work together and collaborate on some of those ideas.
Absolutely. And we're running a little close to time. So I want to kind of end with a final audience question to all of you to take us back to kind of the broader picture perspective. So how do you think that AV deployments in Texas will help inform upcoming deployments in other states and regions? Are there particular, one lesson learned that you want to leave the audience with on that topic? We can start with you, Richard.
I think it's the collaborative aspect, just putting a priority on within the state governance area. Make sure you're devoting some resources to understanding what's going on. CAV task force or similar type things, and that is happening in quite a few states now. We're really at a pretty mature. Well, we have a long way to go, but we're at a mature level compared to just 3 years ago when Kodiak was born. There's a lot of savvy people on the state side. There's a high level conversation with a lot of depth and understanding. And thankfully, in the U.S. transportation world, the states talk to each other and listen to each other, and there's a lot of learning going on back and forth. The truck ADS developers, some are operating in other states, and they're looking for that kind of level of knowledge across the board.
Absolutely. And Dan?
Yeah, I think all of that's right. I think one of the things that's made this really work and be successful is what Robert touched on, is just how closely people in the ecosystem have worked together and supported each other. And I think I think people are starting to see the benefits of that in Texas, and starting to see these jobs and opportunities. And I guess if Robert can pick on California a little bit, I am the AV trucking industry's only person in Chicago, which is the other major freight hub that's not Texas, and I do worry sometimes. I mean, obviously my company is very focused on Texas, but I do wonder how we can compete with an ecosystem that is open and inviting and really wants to see success without strings attached, the way Texas does. So I think the lesson is this is really, I guess the other lesson is this is really important. This is important to economy and how this country works. And following Texas's lead is going to be really important as we think about how goods move around in the 21st century.
Absolutely. Robert?
Yeah, I mean, great response to both Richard and Dan. I mean, when it comes to Texas, when I do travel, when we are virtually right now, but when I could travel, other states would ask you, what kind of model do you guys look for? And 9 out of 10 times it's Texas and what they've created. And again, the ecosystem, all of our, all the major players are there. All the OEMs now in the truck space, and Richard knows this, they used to be kind of like arm's length with the ADS developers, and now all 4 major OEMs, including our partner Navistar, has jumped in. And a lot has to do with creating a regulatory and also community that accepts this type of technology. We get a lot of questions from the investor community and from the whole ecosystem. What is the regulatory framework? And we point to Texas as a model. And Dan and Richard touched on this as well, and also Darran. Like, if TuSimple and the whole industry doesn't pull off what we've talked about in the next 4 to 5 years, we're going to be in trouble. I mean, the amount of freight demand from e-commerce and fresh produce and just how goods have moved, and COVID has just increased that exponentially on how we consume goods. So there's a lot riding on this, and thank you to Darran and PAVE for doing what you guys do when it comes to public education. It's been a fun panel, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And Darran, we'll leave you with the last word.
All right, the last word's collaboration. But truly, through organizations like PAVE, and then I certainly need to recognize our cities, our counties, our elected leaders, and our universities who are key players in all of this as well. We don't do this alone as a state DOT, and then we reach out and engage industry as a collective group to do that, and then certainly sharing through other venues. Richard mentioned there's an AV community practice amongst DOTs at federal highways level. There's a national automation strategy being developed, and the lessons we're learning, we're bringing direct to those to incorporate those in at the federal level, as well as AUVSI and ITS America and a number of other organizations that have common interests.
Absolutely. Well, we're sadly at the end of our time together, but Darran, Richard, Dan, Robert, thank you all again for taking the time to join us for this topic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tabitha.
And a big thank you to our live audience in attendance and those of you who submitted questions in advance. If you'd like to follow up with PAVE or one of the panelists on this topic, please reach out to us via our website contact form or just reply to your registration email. And as a reminder, we will be posting this full video recording on our YouTube channel and website later this afternoon. And don't forget to join us every Wednesday this month for our other April panels that are taking a broader look at the implications of AV technology. Next week's conversation is what do AVs mean for infrastructure, which is one you won't want to miss. Registration is now available on our website at pavecampaign.org/events. Thank you all.